It's a little bit self-serving because that's why I find Homebuilding is here.
I was good. My next
know what I
question was
mean?
going to be, do you know anywhere where you could, where do it yourself, where you could get some good information? But I would be
Any relevant
facetious.
links?
Yeah.
Any relevant podcasts?
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I kind of felt like Justin reading that.
Did you find yourself trying to emulate Justin?
I think he says it so often, and I'm so used to hearing it.
Brian, just do you.
I'm off the script. All right, I am Brian Pontalillo. Today, I will be your host. Justin is
On a golf outing.
Yeah, he's on a golf outing. Justin is actually wrapping up an article. I think actually we talked. I had written in my notes that there was going to be a little spoiler alert here. His article is about building a Mantle fireplace surround, but I think we talked about it last time on the podcast, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
We talked about the code clearances and how tricky.
Yeah, we did talk about
they
it.
are.
And we have Matt Milham at the table as well. Mm-hmm. And it's actually his mantle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is Justin at your house right now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He might be.
He's not like making himself a cup of coffee like in your kitchen and just roaming around.
Yeah, he might be feeding the cats. I don't know.
So last week we built the Mantle in Justin's shop, and then we installed it in Matt's house.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty smooth process. It's a pretty elegant mantle.
Yeah, it looks
Federal
great.
style, real simple details, and Justin did a good job of simplifying the build and install process.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be a pretty super article.
So Matt, maybe you've talked about this in the past, but it kind of dovetails into some of the questions that we have today. But you've got how long have you owned your house, and you've been doing a bunch of work to it, specifically this room?
Yeah, it's been, 5 months, I guess I've owned it.
Yeah.
Not real long. But yeah, that room specifically, because the ceiling was just a mess when we moved in. It was a 3/8-inch drywall that had kind of sagged. I don't know if it was because, it's thin and it's roughly 60, 70 years old.
Did it sag, or was it just following the kind of contours of your wonky ceiling framing?
There was maybe a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely some of that. But also, it just looked like it was sort of like, like if you have a tent, between the poles. It was kind of like that.
I've never seen that. I know that happens
Yeah.
when you don't use, thick enough drywall on ceilings. I've never actually seen it.
Yeah, it was really only noticeable. Like you couldn't see any of the defects in the middle of the day, when the sun was hitting it.
Right.
Even though the ceiling is still not perfect. It's a lot better than it was. But at night, when you just had the ceiling lights on, it just looked like basically like you were standing on the beach or something like that. Like the edge where the water comes up, like all the ripples. It just kind of looked like that, just going from one end of the room to the other. Yeah.
The ceiling light, it creates those shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was all kinds of mixed trim, the windows. There were 3 different kinds of trim around the windows.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So you pulled all that. So you gutted the room essentially? Or?
Yeah, I didn't pull all of it because some of it I just wasn't sure when I was going to get to, and I didn't want to basically open that up. There's no ceiling detail around those windows. I mean, they just leak like crazy. Okay. And I did seal around the windows, or at least what I could do on the ones that I did remove the trim from.
Yeah. So I didn't ask you about this when I was there, but you gonna paint those windows?
I don't want to. No, the wood part. No, I want to just leave that wood.
Are you gonna put any kind of finish on it?
I might because definitely on those casements, there's mold at the bottom.
Yeah,
some mildew
that's
at the
what I was
bottom.
wondering about, and I have that situation actually.
Yeah, and I'm I don't know what to do about this exactly.
Yeah.
Do I sand it and then go over it with some?
So these are clad units, wood clad units, or
They're
they're just
Anderson A series, and so they're probably vinyl clad on the outside and wood on the inside, right?
That sounds right. I haven't.
Yeah, they're the same
really
windows
looked at
that
the
I have
outsides.
in my place. Yeah, so I'm
and
familiar with
so
them.
the mullions and all that kind of stuff just have never been finished?
No.
Oh, really?
And that's why I asked, because I want to leave some of mine unfinished as well, but I'm starting to get that little bit of staining from mildew, and I think I might have to do a wipe on poly or something, just a light finish to make it easier to clean that off at least.
Yeah.
So it doesn't stain.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, I was hoping to be able to put at least on some of the windows, like storms, hoping that maybe that would keep some of the condensation down, because I'm that's pretty much got to be what's causing it, I imagine. I haven't been there through a winter, but it's probably condensation on the windows just running down and then sort of like pooling on those and then causing that mildew, I'm assuming. Really don't know.
Yeah.
So you've done so you're kind of revamping the whole trim package of this living room. We've had a question associated with it, but before we get to that, I sound like a host.
We haven't even really started the show yet, but we'll get back to starting the show.
But I want to. You've done a similar project that I took on regarding like this fireplace, mantle, this fireplace around in that you made your own concrete hearth. Mm-hmm. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So it had like a.
What was there?
It was like a brick tile type.
Like a reddish kind of fire tile.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Probably like a 4x4
or
6x6, 51, I think. Depending on what paperwork you go by, it's 51 or 57.
Okay, nice. So yeah, I have a 1942 cave, and I had a similar hearth. Was it flush with a hardwood floor?
No, it was up about 1.25 inches or so. Yeah. And I demoed that. I took it out, used a couple different techniques. Yeah. Excavated down to what I guess was sort of like the base that, the whole thing sits on. And then, just poured in a couple bags.
Which was subfloor?
No, the subfloor was sort of like cut out around that. And below that is just more concrete. But there was definitely like a cold joint there.
Oh, okay.
They had put the bed for the hearthstone on top of that. So.
Yeah.
And then I just got some 5,000 PSI Quikrete.
Yeah.
And
so
mix that up.
So you had like this, what do you do for your formwork? Because now how thick is that hearth?
Yeah, so I put it back. Basically, I just ran it flush with the inside of the hearth. So it's ended up 1.25 inches thick. The floor was out a little bit, and I didn't, worry about that taper because it just seemed like everything was out that same amount. Yeah. And I just made formwork out of, I ripped down 2x4s and stuck it together with pass load.
There you go. Nice. Now, did you seal the joint between your formwork and like the floor at all?
Yeah, I did. Okay. I caulked all that in.
Oh, you did?
So, yeah. So everything was pretty tight.
Yeah. Because I did something similar where I secured like this formwork together, but secured it at the back edge, and then I kind of lined everything just like with packing tape for like not like a release agent, but just to make it easier when I pop those formworks that. And it's sealed and make sure that any water didn't kind of flow between the formwork and leak out onto the floor and cause some issues. But and then so I know Justin had mentioned when you guys were talking about this firebox that it's mostly decorative. So did you go all the way back into the fireplace floor with it, or did you?
No, and I would probably have done that if I had to do it again. Since it just looks a bit ratty back there.
I gotcha.
And it's not like I can't go back and put some more in there, and I might.
Because it's not used.
It's not.
You wouldn't use it. You wouldn't do that if you were actually going to use it.
Right.
I didn't. I have a fireplace insert, so I just kind of essentially established a dam at that firebox opening, and and then I actually poured separate molds that were the same thickness of the hearth itself, and then like my wood stove or my insert actually just sits on those.
To bring it up to the same height.
And there's airflow all back there. Yeah. But I've been happy with my concrete hearth. Are you stoked with yours? It looks good.
Yeah.
Yours is dark.
Yeah. It looked like regular concrete, and then I polished it a little bit just to like 50 grit, and then use some boiled linseed oil on it, and that kind of darkens it up.
Nice. Yeah. Did it penetrate evenly? Does it have an even look to it, or is it mottled? Or
it looks a little bit mottled, but I just keep going back and hitting it again and again. So it probably has about 5 coats on it now, and it seems to have gotten to a point where it's all in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks pretty nice. He exposed some of the aggregate when he grinded it and polished it, and I like that look.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good option.
It looks a little bit rough, like it doesn't look like just like a really polished like concrete countertop or something like that. It looks a little like rock.
Yeah, mine almost looks kind of like bluestone. I tried to dye it dark, and we've mentioned this way back where I tried that Quikrete dye and I put like a boatload of it in, and it just didn't. It was that liquid dye, and it's just not. It didn't tint it as significantly as I thought it would. I think they make some other better dyes out there.
I've used the Buddy Rhodes
Buddy
dye,
Rhodes stuff, and the Futong.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Shanghai. Yeah, that's good stuff. But yeah, so it has all. I wanted like I almost wanted it as dark as yours, like that dark deep gray. But it just kind of gave it a little bluish hue, which is kind of cool because it's somewhat like bluestone.
Yeah,
but it's dirt cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, concrete's not expensive.
Yeah, not at all.
It's a cool thing to work.
Yeah.
Cool. So, do you want to start the show?
Yeah, let's start the show. So these two boneheads that are yakking away at you already without being introduced. To my right, we have Matt Milham, Associate Editor at Fine Homebuilding, and to my left, we have Robert Yagid, Editorial Director at Fine Homebuilding. Two usual suspects on the show. Thank you for joining us today, fellas.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Does Justin ever thank us? I don't know.
I think he thanks the
But thank
audience
you.
at least.
Yeah, thank you,
It's
Brian.
more important that
If
you
you guys
thank the
want to keep
audience.
a list of the ways that I'm better than Justin, go for it. We'll present it to him when he comes back to the office.
Yep.
The one housekeeping note, feedback, questions, that's what the show is built on, and we get most of it via email, fhbpodcast@taunton.com. TAUNTON, Taunton. So if you got a question, if you have some feedback, we love that stuff. That's what we do with the show, answer questions and make it a conversation. So shoot us that stuff, send lots of information, send photos. We've been getting great stuff. Last week we even had the video question, which was awesome.
That was cool. Yeah. Somebody else has to do that.
Yeah, do more of that. That was
cool.
really cool. You can show us stuff and we can, we can play it on the screen.
Walk us through your problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was helpful.
So that's it. We're going to get to questions in just a moment, but can I indulge myself for just a moment?
Geez.
Just one moment. You guys don't even have to reply to this.
All right.
I just remembered that there's a story from this morning, kind of irrelevant to this show, but I'm going to tell it because I have not told this story yet today, and I have to tell it.
All right.
I was driving to work this morning, and it was a light rain. I was on the highway, and I had my windshield wipers on intermittent, my Ford Ranger. We've talked about trucks on the show, so that makes it kind of relevant. And at one time, the windshield wipers did their wipe. And as they came down, the driver's side windshield wiper I saw dislodged. It dislodged.
Nice.
You know, they just hook on. These windshield wipers on my truck for a long time. So not that it didn't break, I don't think, but so I was surprised that it dislodged. And so I turned the windshield wipers off. I was like, okay, I gotta either stop and hook this thing back on, or just drive without the windshield wipers.
Power
and it
through.
wasn't power through. It wasn't raining. That
Increase
hard.
the speed so like the water really sheds. Yeah, that's good.
So I thought I could make it, and I'm cruising on the highway, and the rain picks up a little bit. I finally get to the point where it's dangerous now. I can't see if people put on their brake lights. I have no depth of field, so I decide, okay, I have to go for it. I have to wipe.
Yeah.
I have to wipe my windshield. So I turn the windshield wiper on for one pass, and the blade
just like flies right up.
launches
Nice.
off the truck, launches over a car next to me, and lands. It's 3-lane highway. Lands 2 lanes over.
Oh, my.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's
I
hilarious.
had to drive the rest of the way, leaning over to the passenger side of the car and just wiping the one side.
Sounds like a safe commute.
Yeah.
So we could keep on going with these stories. It's a great story. I have almost a similar story because I used to drive, not that your truck is a beater, but I've driven some beaters.
Yeah.
And I had a problem where my windshield washer fluid pump wasn't working, and I was on the highway bringing my girlfriend at the time, to the airport early in the morning, and it was like one of those soppy winter days, slushy. I was on 95, and like in those conditions, like you're just hammering your windshield wipers constantly, And so it got to the point where I couldn't see, and it was like in desperation. I was like, I had like water or something like in my car. I was like, I'm gonna open my window.
Right,
I'm gonna open my
driving.
window while driving. Just throw some water on this thing and hit the windshield wipers, and it just like instantly froze into like this, like impenetrable shield across my thing. I was just like, all right, I'm pulling over. I don't think she was too impressed. All right.
Okay. Matt,
Nope.
you got anything?
No.
Send us your commuting horror stories.
Yes. Send us your driving horror stories, especially if in a truck, then we can tell it on the show.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some questions. Let's get to it. Troy, I think this is our guy Troy. I'm assuming that this is our guy Troy.
There's got to be another Troy out there.
There might be another
But
Troy
let's
out there,
assume.
but let's assume that this is our guy Troy up in, is he in Washington State?
Personalized service. I believe he's in Washington
Yeah, he's
State.
in Washington State up on the coast, remodeling his house. He writes, FHB guys, hope you are well. Input for a future topic, the ceiling show. They are arguably the largest single feature in a home, equal to the floor, I guess, and are for the most part an undisturbed white flat plane. Cheap ceiling paint is a perfect metaphor for them. They seem to be vastly missed opportunity for craftsmanship in modern homes. Hashtag keep craft alive. Topic ideas. Troy wrote that. Topic ideas. Heights, textures, trays, soffits, color. Heaven forbid. Oh, that's attached to the color. Color, heaven forbid. Beams, plasterwork, crowns, and other stuff. Sound transfer, water damage mitigation techniques, fixing, sag, settling. Troy goes on. He wants us to do a ceiling show. Troy, we're probably not going to do a ceiling show. It'll be a bit specific for an hour, but there's a lot of good stuff to talk about here. And he says, I'm sure there are other building science-y things that I missed. So what
Let's hone in on like the treatments and the design elements of
Yeah.
it, less so the insulation.
Yeah.
And the building science aspect of it.
Let's do that. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting because sometimes I agree. Like a flat white ceiling is perfect. Like just let it kind of just fade in and not be like an element in the room that you really have to pay attention to.
And it's worth pointing out that some surfaces in house need to be inexpensive.
Yeah.
And covering your ceilings with drywall is cheap. You're saving, like that's how you're keeping the costs of your house under control.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that ceiling treatment has an incredible impact on how a room feels, and there is something that is just comfortable about having that kind of soft, even plane above you when you walk in a room where it's not like a focus, like you don't want it to be an element, but I do agree that ceiling height is a critical factor. I unfortunately have low ceilings in my home. And it's a bummer, you know what I mean? Like I live in a small home, and the low ceiling height, I mean, it kind of makes it feel cozy, but I wish that I had small spaces with high ceilings because I love that feel, I feel like you get away with a smaller house if you have taller ceilings and you'll still feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes in terms of the decisions to vault ceilings, that could work too, but I think, again, just to be sensitive or just to be aware that you don't want to create a cave or like a cavernous kind of feeling,
right?
You know what I mean? Like where, wow, you've like really skewed the proportion of this room for this kind of grand impact,
right?
That could actually feel pretty weird when you're hanging out there solo and you're just amidst this empty space, but in terms of treatments and trim.
Can we just keep going on heights for a minute?
Yeah.
Because I agree with you that getting the ceiling height right is super important, and in a lot of cases, that isn't a very tricky thing to do, right? If we're talking about let's just say we're talking about a pretty average size house, and you're anywhere in the 8 to 10 foot ceiling height, like it's pretty much gonna be fine.
Yep.
As you guys know, I live in a tiny house. I don't live in a tiny house. I live in a very small house. Now, tiny house has a new definition. I live in a 700 square foot house and we have an open living space upstairs that has our kitchen and our family room in it. And that's very small for what you would think of as a great room compared to other great rooms. And we have about 7.5 foot ceilings in the house. And so I did do some things in our space that made a big difference, because that small space with those low ceilings and having it be sort of long and open, it felt odd. The scale felt really off, and so I did put I put 2 skylights in the ceiling, but I put them in one well. So I have this really large skylight well centered over the family room area that's like 10 feet in one dimension by maybe 9 feet in the other dimension. It's a little less than square, and that made a huge difference in that space. And it creates this sort of like release when you're in that part of the room. When you're sitting on the couch under that part of the room, there's sort of this like release when you walk in there.
Yeah.
And then I kind of stole an opportunity where I took down a staircase to the attic to create a tray ceiling. So the staircases were stacked. I had one staircase coming up from the basement to the main floor, and another staircase stacked above that going up to the attic. The attic wasn't really usable for much, so I decided this staircase was a big taking up a whole lot of floor space and not offering very much, so I took it out. And now I had this opening right above the stairs that came up. And so I decided, like, I'm going to do something with this. And so I put a paneled ceiling in that space and just lifted it up the height of the ceiling joists. So not very much, 6 inches or so. A little less than the height of the ceiling joists, actually. And that makes a big difference. When you're coming up the stairs, it doesn't feel like you're going to walk up and bump your head. It gives you this little bit of opening up there. And then it made, and consequently, it made, there's this sort of, what was a hallway, which is now open, but is still a little area of circulation. It almost still feels like a hallway. It made that feel purposeful because that low ceiling in that area feels like it was meant to be saying this is a corridor.
So that's so you're bringing up a topic which is like the ceiling plane itself, which I find interesting, especially as we see more and more homes with open floor plans, less partitions, where you maybe have a kitchen that's part of a living room, part of a dining space, and they're all kind of like in this one contiguous area. Is that you could really, and I've seen it done to like really tastefully, where they vary the ceiling planes, like where over the kitchen, for instance, it'll be a drop soffit. It kind of defines that zone, you know, or suggests like, all right, this is a specific area, or in a circulation zone, maybe it's on the periphery or a hallway where that's lower and that's like a soffit, even amidst a vaulted room or connected to a vaulted room.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's a way to bring logic and order to what could just be a bland, general
big open space. Yeah. And you know, Sarah Suzanka, you know, really dives deep into that in her books and you know in the stuff that she offers, the content that she offers about architecture and home design. And you know, I walked into, after being very familiar with Sarah's stuff, I walked into Frank Lloyd Wright's home and studio in Chicago when I was out there and went to visit that house, and all of it was right on display in his work too. And he really played with ceiling heights and in a kind of dramatic way. Like some of the rooms had really low ceilings.
Well, you had brought up this idea of release. And so like what he's known for is this idea of compression release. So like if you ever walked into any of one of his projects and you know these really low doorways and you come into these entries that are like really compressed, low ceiling heights, narrow walls, and it's made to like psychologically influence you to some capacity. And then you come to a point within that experience, because he's crafting every step that you take, you come to this point where the release is like, wow, you take a step into a vaulted room or into a room that has a commanding view and lots of glass. So it's a cool little strategy that you could implement even in the most subtle ways, the idea of compression release, and you can definitely feel it.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Cool. Yeah.
All right, so treatments. What were you gonna say? Well, you're gonna go on to treatments.
Oh yeah, treatments. Again, I think, you know, it's like anything in design or home building. I think you just have to be careful just to not latch onto one idea and like, you know, force it into a space without considering all the other elements. So it's like if you already have low ceilings, you know what, maybe not a coffered ceiling is appropriate there, because it's just going to make you feel super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I like coffered ceilings in some instances. What I like, and I've seen a bit, is more of a, I mean, it could be done every number of ways, whether it's beadboard, whether it's V-groove, not that it's nickel gap, but it could be just maybe not even shiplap, but just a clean edged, paneled kind of look that is captured in a really built up crown. You know, so there's and painted white.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it still gives you that lift in a room, but there's just a dimension and a quality and a craftsmanship to it. That's I'm contemplating doing that in my dining room.
I got a tip for you.
Yeah. What do you got?
Okay, here we go. So crown molding, and we're going to learn about this in our next issue of Fine Home Building, a masterclass in moldings written by Marianne Cusado. Just a dynamite story. I learned so much. Crown molding is, although crown molding is at the ceiling, because it's technically not supporting the ceiling, it's what's known as I'm going to mess this up now, transitional molding. And that's why crown molding, at the top profile of crown molding, coves and curves outward, projects towards the ceiling. When you do something like you're talking about, where your crown molding is now supporting something because it's on a beam, or even if it's a faux beam, it should not be crown molding. So if you had paneling up there and this molding was looking like it was holding that up, it should not be crown molding, it should be bed mold.
Okay.
Because bed mold has that opposite curve.
Yep.
And that is a supporting molding. So in real architecture, in real structural stuff, you would never have something curving out. You never have
Yeah.
a cove to support something. That's
Yeah.
not structurally correct. You would have a bed mold
I
or
gotcha.
something that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so you have to use a bed mold, not crown molding.
I'll try not to screw that up.
Don't screw that up,
But
Rob.
that brings me to my next point
Yes,
is
go.
the structural aspects of it. Because especially in terms of like a box beam ceiling or just adding faux beams or faux wrap beams or actually wrapping beams, is to where those terminate and to be mindful of where those terminate.
Right.
I've seen some unfortunate treatments where the beams, and these are faux beams, this is like a kind of a box beam treatment where that beam might die into directly above a fireplace, which logically that seems really strange to me because, I read that as, well, there's a flue back there. Is that thing terminating into the fireplace? And like, okay, is everything beneath that playing into the idea of structure and is there logic to it? I've seen the same happen with range hoods in kitchens where the beams die directly into like a big range hood shroud. And again, that reads to me as, well, that's strange because there's nothing reading that's supporting the range hood. You know what I mean? So I think like we've mentioned before when it comes to like case openings or trim work, like just to be mindful of the logic. Behind it.
Does it
and
make
those
sense?
coffer
Yeah.
ceilings and those box beam ceilings. I mean, you're adding like the idea of structure, and so there should be a logic and an order to it. And when it's done well, it kind of just looks confusing, and it looks like an application. It doesn't look like a supporting element.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm going to go back to Marianne's article like one more time. You guys are going to love this, and it gets at all that stuff, and I totally agree with that. Another thing that she writes in there that has to do with ceilings is and crown, and Troy had mentioned crown in here, is that, and I didn't know this, but it's architecturally correct not to vary the height of your crown based on your ceiling height. So we would think like the taller your ceilings are, the bigger crown you have, which is true with baseboard, right? If you have a tall ceilings, you would have a taller baseboard. With crown, actually, as ceiling heights change, the crown throughout a house would stay the same size, but you would build up, because you mentioned built up crown.
Yeah.
You would build up the crown to create a cornice.
Okay.
So you don't actually make the crown bigger, you create a cornice. So one of the simple ways she suggests to create a cornice is to use use an inverted baseboard with like an OG molding at the bottom, and then to set your crown on that. So now you've created a little bit of a frieze and and an architrave, and you're starting to create an entablature. So there's a tip for ceilings. If you are going to do crown and you have tall ceilings, look to not a bigger crown. She says, heaven forbid, don't double the crown.
Yeah.
Find a way to create an architecturally correct cornice. She also says it could be as simple as a few inches below the crown you put picture rail. And then you paint the space in between the same color as the trim.
Cool.
Should that work? So really, really, really good stuff in there.
There's also other treatments that are less kind of are certainly more decorative. And I don't know particularly how they're executed, whether it's applied to MDF or not. But it's I'll just suggest that people check out the work of Jessica Helgerson, who's a designer out in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of her projects she'll do some pretty interesting ceiling treatments. And they're really subtle, they're really elegant, but they're another option. And they're more pattern designs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, check that out. What about color?
What that's where I wanted to go. Well, first of all, can I just first, before we talk about color, let's talk about ceiling paint, because I think ceiling paint is. I mean, he mentions that it's cheap, and it is the cheapest, one of the cheapest paints available, ceiling paint. But I've always been confused by ceiling paint, like actually wondering what it actually is.
Well, is it primer or
is it primer?
What is the
Does
difference
it have
between-
anti-gravity properties? Like what's going on?
Is it just flat paint?
Yeah.
Like why do they make it? Why is it called ceiling paint?
Well, it doesn't need to do anything, so you don't need to wash it. So like, wall paint, you may bump into it and get something on it. You have kids that are drawing on it or whatever, and it probably has to be washable to some extent, I think. So ceiling paint probably just doesn't have any of those additives that make it, I would guess. I don't know.
Maybe that's it. I guess I wonder, though, what's the difference between that and primer? Mm-hmm. Maybe it doesn't.
Maybe nothing.
Maybe nothing, or maybe because they're assuming you primed, maybe there doesn't have the adhesion qualities. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wonder what
dig
it
into
is.
it.
Someone should dig into this.
Patrick did that paint science article
That's
a little
right.
while
We'll ask
ago.
Patrick.
We'll ask Patrick.
So what about color?
Bold, man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's all about, I guess, the effect that you want, I don't know. I mean, supposedly, white is supposed to make it feel bigger, airier, and go darker, and it just feels lower. I don't know that necessarily is always true. It probably depends on your wall color. And
I think color. I mean, I genuinely, I believe it. You know that just like quality design, it has these really deep emotional impacts and psychological impacts, and I think that's true of color as well. And so I've heard, whether or not I would be willing to go down this road, but I heard like lavender, like a light lavender, is like a really soothing color. And so I've heard of people painting the ceilings in their bedrooms that color, so that when they wake up, they're like, that's like their first hit.
That's what they see.
You know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm just thinking white in my in my
You know,
house,
I've been in the rooms I've been in with colored ceilings that seem to work are powder rooms. Every once in a while, you walk into a powder room, and mostly it's in houses that have had like an interior designer, interior decorator working on it. You walk into a powder room, and it's like the powder room is all one color. The trim, the walls, the ceiling, it's all just this one color. And because they're small rooms that you're not going to spend a whole lot of time in, they just sort of, it embraces you. Like the space just embraces you, and you're just really comfortable and while you're in that space. But I've never really seen it in really like larger rooms that where I felt like it was working too well.
I mean, I was in a project over the weekend, actually, one of these Gilded Age mansions up in the Berkshires, and you know, they had a tin leaf ceiling, and it was like stunning, and it changed color. So I mean, that's we're not talking about like painting it. I mean, that's a very different treatment,
Right.
and like those tin ceilings that you see in some of the old commercial buildings and things like that. That's totally cool. But I don't think I've seen too many projects where they've made a bold color choice and just rolled that on the ceiling and had it really work out. But people know of projects, send us some photos.
I've seen the sky painted ceilings that I've liked a few times. I've seen it that I haven't liked, but I've seen it that I have.
Right.
It's nice in a kid's room.
Yeah. You get away with a lot in the kids' room, I think.
Anything else on ceilings, guys? No, are we done here? I mean, we could get into sound transfer another time.
yeah.
That's all good stuff, and there are building sciencey stuff, especially when it comes to penetrations and
vaulted
can
ceilings
lights and vaulted
specifically,
ceilings.
especially when people want to move to like a panel treatment, like those kind of that Adirondack style.
Yeah.
Where you got to be mindful of, make sure that's not like your only ceiling plane.
Right. All right,
Yeah.
let's get down into the basement. Jim writes. I lost it. Here we go. Jim writes, here's yet another basement insulation question, but with a twist because it's an unconditioned space and it's going to stay that way. I'm located in Climate Zone 4 of Asheville, North Carolina. I have a 2,700 square foot unconditioned poured concrete daylight basement being converted into a woodworking shop.
Hold on a second. He's got a 2,700 square foot basement?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, which means he's got...
This could be a sweet shop.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a big shop, yeah, for sure.
All right.
Where did I look? Okay, it's completely uninsulated, but the temperature stays between 62 and 76 degrees year-round. Probably due to the fact that 3 walls are fully underground, and the 4th wall, with all the doors and windows, has a 20-foot deep deck over it to keep the sun off it. There's no source of humidity in there except me, and I don't work hard enough to break a sweat. Jim's honesty. The basement stays...
Like Justin.
Yeah, the basement stays dry, plus I have a portable dehumidifier that manages to keep the relative humidity at 45%. Is there any reason to insulate the concrete walls in this cavern? Will painting the concrete be enough? I may want to put in a few 2x4 walls with drywall to cover one or more of the concrete walls. Do I need to put the usual polyiso between these? These walls would just be a place to hang cabinets. Is there a better way to provide a finished look and make it easy to hang cabinets and conceal electrical?
So he seems to be on some level, like, seeking out problems that don't exist.
That's what I felt like.
You know what I mean? One thing that he's bringing up was really interesting is this concept of earth sheltering, which is like gaining the benefits of backfill or cutting into a slope, where I think roughly, depending upon your climate, the average temperature of your soil is going to hang around 52 degrees or something like that. So that's why those walls aren't like ultra cold, you know?
But But I question how he's maintaining those temperatures that he's talking about. Was it 62 to whatever?
Yeah. So what is he doing in that big cavernous space? Yeah, to get those temps up to that degree.
Yeah, that's either coming from the living space, right, or he's got his mechanicals down there, and it's a semi-conditioned space. And so, it may not be intentionally.
Yeah. So what he might, I do wonder like what that floor plane looks like. The ceiling plane of the basement, the floor system, first floor frame.
Right.
Because if he is going to add a shop down there, and if he's going to start to implement some soundproofing elements, like he's going to either add additional insulation, add additional layers of drywall, whatever that might be, and then he will find himself in a position that he then needs to condition that space because he's not getting that that benefit from the conditioned air above. Well, then that's going to change the situation.
Yeah.
But I mean,
that's 62 degrees year round. I mean, that's warm. Asheville is.
But he's not getting it. What's confusing?
Has winters.
Yeah, and what's confusing to me is like he's talking about the fact that he's got this like big 20-foot deck or whatever sheltering the walkout portion and the windows, and so he's not getting any like solar gain in the winter.
Yeah.
Unless that sun is raking low in the sky enough that it's pushing through or beneath the deck.
Yeah. He might have a.
But you would think that would be a benefit.
Furnace down there, but that's still. I mean, I have that situation in it. I mean, it keeps the basement a little bit warm, but not 60
That's true,
degrees.
too. He said unconditioned.
Right.
He said unconditioned.
But that doesn't mean that he's having mechanicals down there.
Right. His boiler, his furnace could be burning down there all winter long, and it does create a lot of
it does.
radiant heat for sure. Yeah.
So I'd consider those. I consider like, all right, what is condition? So very clearly, this basement is being conditioned. By what we're not exactly
by what
sure.
We're not sure, yeah.
And then to see this plan through to its end, I know that he was talking about, doing some 2x4 walls, that sort of thing. But what is going to happen in the ceiling plane? Like what is this going to look like when it's done? And are you going to be, because again, one of those aspects of soundproofing is stopping the transfer of air. Sound drives, rides on air. And so if he buttons that whole ceiling up and, he's not getting the, what did you say? So we don't have a boiler, but maybe he has like hydronic like lines running through the ceiling plane to feed his whatever hydronic baseboard upstairs, and he's getting the net benefit from that in the basement. If that all is going to go away, then start to hit the regular strategies of one, conditioning that space, or thinking about insulating it and yada yada yada, which we've talked about a bunch.
Yeah. And I mean I feel like if he's going to build these walls, at that point, why not put the foam in, put the insulation in? You're going to be covering up that space. You're not going to, if you decide you want it later on, you're not going to want to tear down your drywall, tear down your walls, take your cabinets off the walls, all of that stuff. Yeah. And like you said, if the conditions do change, there's no harm in doing it, except if it's going to cost some money.
Right.
But otherwise there's no harm in doing it.
Yep. That's one of those things. Like I think that some people considers, well, I don't have a problem now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm able to balance my relative humidity. I keep the comfortable temperatures. But as we always talk about time and time again, is like the house as a system is that if you move or you change one element, you could kind of throw things out of balance a little bit. So just consider every aspect of that.
And what about his question about these walls? That it sounds like he just wants them for utility.
Yeah.
And he says just some 2x4 stud walls with drywall, covering them. In a shop area. The first thing that, what came to my mind is do something different than the drywall.
Yeah, do like plywood.
Yeah,
you could
plywood.
Put shelves wherever you want. You could put racks wherever you want.
Yeah, you can just screw into it. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then just run conduit. You don't even need to put 2x4 walls. I mean, just put some furring strips on the wall with some tap cons. Hang your cabinets, run conduit, and then, it'll look finished enough.
Yeah, and as you work in the shop and things evolve, if you want to change electrical, you want to put outlets somewhere else, it makes it easy. Becomes a lot
it's not hidden.
Your needs change. Yeah.
Conduit.
Conduit.
Check out that article coming up soon, right? Working with conduit.
Yep.
Matt?
CJ Nielsen.
All right.
Yep. EMT.
You can do it.
I can do it. I conduit, and so can you.
So audience, that's actually a working headline. That's not a joke, Brian. His little humor here.
Yeah.
He's going for it. We'll see how far that gets.
No, it's already,
exactly.
It's already been
that's what I walked into the meeting today. I said, "Oh boy."
It's already been axed.
Oh, that's great. Well, speaking of you can do it, Todd's got one of those questions for us. Todd writes, I bought a 50s era ranch in upstate New York that has a standard hose bib with a shutoff valve located in the basement. When I set about preparing the house for winter, I realized that the shutoff is busted. No matter how much I crank it, it won't shut off. I know I have to do something to remedy the situation, or my copper pipes might burst and flood the basement floor. I'd like to fix it myself, but my plumbing experience is, well, non-existent. Do I have any options? Matt, I know that you actually already helped Todd with this answer a little bit. So
Yeah.
what did you what did you give him for advice?
Yeah, I found a bunch of different kind of like push fit options, sort of like your shark bite
Yeah.
type fittings. If you want to just kind of like,
Are you talking about cutting and replacing the valve?
yeah.
So you're
yeah.
assuming that his lack of skill is not wanting to solder.
Yeah,
Copper.
really that.
Can you can I hijack this like immediately?
Do it.
Okay. Whether or not it's necessary is, so this is a gate valve that we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. They sell repair kits. So one, he could replace the guts essentially of this valve because they do wear out. I think that's like one of the criticisms of them, that they tend to wear out better than like a ball valve or something like that. And so, because I've had this issue myself where like this valve was leaking, and I was like, oh, what's going on here? You know what I mean? I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to replace this valve. Actually, all I had to do was tighten the packing nut, and that stopped the leak. And so there are repair options for this. Whether or not some people will argue, well, the valve is kind of inferior anyway, so you may as well replace it with something that's better and longer lasting. But they do sell repair kits where you probably shut off your main, try to drain that line, and then you could go on YouTube or wherever and very easily figure out direction to replace the guts of the valve itself. And so that wouldn't have to put this guy in a position where he's got to do some real plumbing work in terms of soldering and things like that.
Yeah.
But if you would like to replace the valve, then Matt, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is just so you never have to worry about this thing again. Put in basically a frost-proof silcock or hose bib, and they have push-fit versions of these. So you would just basically cut close to the wall, take the old one out, put the new one in, sort of like line up where you need to cut. Leave enough to actually put the fitting on there, and then just slide that thing back on. You got to drain the lines, just like you said. But then that ball valve is just sort of taken out of the equation entirely.
So
you can just leave it open forever.
In place for now.
Yeah, and then
leave it open.
Yeah, and then because it's anti-siphoning. You don't have to worry about that thing freezing ever again. Just leave it in place. You don't have to go back and screw with it every year.
Yeah, I was skeptical of those, but they work.
I
I have one in my house, and it's not a problem.
Skeptical of the
Of these
frost-proof.
frost-proof. I didn't really understand it.
Yeah, I put 2 on mine. Yeah. What's the mechanism? It's just shutting off. It's essentially has a valve in it, but it's like further inboard into more of a heated conditioned space.
Right. Yeah, it's in the basement rather than in the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, so that's a pretty solid option.
It could be. I don't know. That's the one I thought was maybe a good long-term solution.
There are also a lot of pretty useful push fittings now, so that you could do a repair like this without having to do any soldering.
Right. Yeah.
Like you can do this whole
Let's talk
repair
about-
without
so-
soldering.
Dude, who's this, Todd? Do some soldering, man. Buy a little bit of extra pipe, buy some fittings, and get the stuff, and just hang out in your garage or basement and do it a couple times.
Yeah.
And you'll be good.
Buy a torch.
buy a torch. It's not expensive stuff.
Yeah.
It's not
And
expensive
I think
stuff.
you're going to do it
Sorry.
and just figure it out and get the enjoyment out of knowing how to solder. How about that, Bri?
I like it. I like it.
Because because I was in the same spot as him, with some plumbing work. I was like, I'm not totally comfortable doing this, and so I just did it. I did a couple not way back when. I don't get to say way back when, but
You're getting there.
I'm getting there. But it was just all right, on the bench top, I'm just gonna crank out some of these joints, and go through the process and cut the pipe and ream it out and clean up that fitting and flux it and do it all. And it doesn't have to look like a pro did it to be perfectly fine.
Right. If it's not leaking, it
Yeah.
can be a little messy.
Yeah, just do it.
So, but let's open this discussion up a little bit. About not about plumbing, but about doing things yourself. I think if we took a very little sample of our listenership here from feedback that we get, I mean, I feel like we probably have a very similar listenership that we do to our readership of the magazine and users of the website, which is, a lot of professionals in the building trades and a lot of people who are pretty, at least intermediate do-it-yourselfers.
Yeah. It's so fun. Sorry, little sidebar. It's like, because of media and because of publishing, we always get asked like, well, who are you for, pros or non-pros?
Right.
I was like, best building practices don't change no matter,
Right,
don't change.
right.
So that's who we talk to, people who care about that.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. There's some people who make their living at this and there's people who don't. And so the exposure to projects happen at probably a less frequency for those who don't,
And so I'm working on a story for the magazine right now about installing rooftop solar panels. And after visiting a job site and watching this process happen, I felt like, well, I could do that. I could do this. If this is my house, I could do this. Yes,
that happens with everything, right?
It does happen with a lot of things. And there's some parts of it that are, of course, going to be trickier than others, like making the electrical connections into the meter and stuff like that, where maybe I might get the electrician over for that.
Or you're not allowed
last
to.
Step. Or you might not be allowed to. But that that's a state by state thing, and a lot of times in a lot of states, like even where professionals can't do the work of other trades, even in a lot of those states, homeowners can do whatever they want on their houses. And so the question is, how do you make the decision to actually tackle something you haven't done before?
First and foremost, safety.
Safety, good.
I think.
Yeah.
Like
for sure.
Yeah, like whether, and that might not even be know-how. That might just be like, I actually don't have the tools that I need to do this in a safe manner.
To be safe on my roof, in the example of PV.
Yeah, and I'm not going to actually, and then it does not make sense for me to invest in those tools to do it in a safe manner. I may as well just have someone, come in and knock this out and do it without added risk. So that's one. Yeah. And I think that could be a whole host of things.
Absolutely.
Time. I mean, so there's the budget thing, the time and the budget thing.
Yep.
And what your time is worth, which I value my time like very low.
Right. But cost of of materials, for example, if you're buying something very expensive for a job, you might not want to screw that up, as opposed to like, hey, I want to create this trim element. Yeah. And if I don't cut my miters right, I can go buy another stick.
Yeah. And so and then like I think a big part comes down to expectations. For instance, if you've never done a really complicated, let's just say some super full-blown room with like really complicated trim. There's built-ins, there's cabinets, there's wainscoting, there's crown, there's a coffered ceiling. And it's like, all right, what are your expectations? I guarantee by the end of that project, you're going to be pretty dialed in and buttoned up.
Yeah.
But if you have never done that before, it's going to probably just take some time. And you might have to like burn through some stock because you're miscutting or your joints aren't as tight as you want them to be.
Yeah.
I think a lot for our audience, because they're engaged with this and they dabble in this, they're super capable. So they might not do it as quickly as the guy who's been doing it for 20 or 30 years, but that doesn't mean that they can't get to pretty stunning results.
Absolutely.
So it's those expectations.
And a lot of skills transfer, right? How to measure things, how to use specific tools. Those skills transfer from one job to the from framing to finish and stuff like that.
And I think we all have those expectations too. And sometimes, like sometimes I wonder if like my design aesthetic has evolved because of my capabilities, and so I tend to like skew to more like simple shaker, modern kind of an aesthetic, because I don't really like this big ostentatious and like extravagant and built up profiles and everything. But I also wonder, like, I don't necessarily have the skills to knock out a library or an office in stained grade mahogany,
right?
So I won't put that upon myself. But then there's other things like I could imagine like masonry, like a mason in a wall. Like you're just not going to be as good as someone who has seen and immersed themselves in that craft for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. So long as you're okay with the expectation that you set, okay, Go ahead.
Yeah, and then there's certainly things that make the difference. Masonry, for example, let's say you're let's say laying a patio, or building a wall. So some landscape work, and you may not have the skill that the mason has to make the finished patio look as good or the wall look as good because you haven't worked with stone. You don't know how to cut stone, and you don't know how to lay up rocks in a way that is aesthetically pleasing and keep your joints tight. But you can make sure the same way that he can. You can make sure that base is done right.
Yes.
And that your work's not going to move.
Yeah.
And so the aesthetics may not end up the same, but the structural quality can be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit self-serving because that's why I find home building is here.
I was good. My next question is going to be: do you know anywhere where a do-it-yourselfer could get some good information? But I would be
any relevant links?
Yeah.
Any relevant podcasts?
Matt, what do you think? Because you're working on your house now, and you're doing lots of different types of work.
Yeah, I buy a lot of books. I read a lot of stuff. Like I've done a little bit of electrical stuff, but not a ton. Fortunately, my dad's an electrician, so he's been able to help me with some stuff. But also, I just bought some electrical books, so I can know exactly how to wire things right. I'm not just guessing.
Yeah,
that can be kind of a dangerous thing. And we also borrowed from the library the electrical code book. Just to make sure that a lot of things were being done right, because we were thinking about sort of like wiring up some of our own fixtures and probably doing some things that are a little more on the crafty side than on the sort of like straight up home building side. But yeah, I mean, there's so many videos out there. There's so many different resources, and if you have a little bit of knowledge, it's like you start to know like what guy is like a hack and what's actually like a useful video, and also just like looking at the results. Thinking about that the guy with his basement and building those walls. I was looking up some stuff specifically to maybe answer parts of his question, and I came across this website. I won't call it out, but they were claiming to be sort of like the end all be all for like finishing basements, and then they had like a bunch of information that was just like, I know for a fact is wrong based on like actual like scientific studies of like of like nailing patterns and like how how like things hold and stuff like that. And so at that point, you just like sort of like learn to dismiss something. That said, you may hear something at some point in your life, and I'm sure it's happened to all of us. I know it happens to me all the time. And for a long time, like that just like carries over in my head as sort of like doctrine, and the way like that is the right thing. And then you find out years later that you're wrong. Mm-hmm. But as far as like, how I go about like figuring out how to do things for the house, it's just a lot of research first. I don't want to make any huge mistakes, but at the same time, since it's my own house, I don't feel like I feel like if I make a mistake, it's not like the end of the world, know, like as long as I'm not burning the place down or flooding it, it's worth a shot, especially if you can afford to bring somebody in to do it right after you screw it up. Think about, maybe like the possibility that you may have to pay for this thing twice if you get in over your head. But so far I haven't gotten into anything too complex, and nothing that I haven't done. I mean, I'd built concrete countertops. I'd done, some electrical. I've done some plumbing. Yeah. So the stuff that I've done so far has not been above my head, but I'll probably get there eventually.
Yeah. And there's like Rob mentioned safety, and that can be like our immediate safety, like actually doing the work we're doing. Do we know how to work safely with this tool, or do we have the proper fall protection? But then there's like the latent safety issues, like, electrical work, take the time to make sure you're doing that right. You want to go crazy with some trim and try some new things, go for it. Knock yourself out.
Yeah,
go nuts.
Who cares? You're not gonna, not gonna hurt anybody.
Yeah, but get your electrical right, get your plumbing right. So you don't have, a big leak inside a wall that you don't know about for a long time. If you're talking about building assemblies, make sure that the building assembly makes sense. Structural stuff. Work with the building inspector. They're going to help you get the structure right. Well, hopefully, in
many of them,
some jurisdictions.
most of them will for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well,
cool,
fellas. I think we did it.
I think we did another one.
Thanks again, guys, for joining me. Thank you all for listening out there. And if you do enjoy the show, please give us a rating on iTunes. Tell your friends. your colleagues, your coworkers, your fellow do-it-yourselfers. And again, please send your questions and comments to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Build on, baby.